Welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Have you ever found yourself in a situation so mundane, typical, only to have it shift drastically, becoming something you'll never forget? I imagine this is how a lot of people feel after a car accident. Driving on a road you've driven 100 times in the same car you've had for years. Then suddenly you're sideswiped, and that drive isn't so mundane anymore. It can be as simple as using a public restroom, as normal as going to prom, or as safe as visiting a familiar place with family. It all starts off so simple, so routine, but it just takes that one thing to change everything. What exactly is that one thing? Well, for each it's different, and I guess you'll just have to stick around to find out. So, let's get started, shall we? So my dad told me a pretty crazy story involving him, my Uncle Joey, and a household name I'd only ever known as Pablo. Until a while back, I had no idea what the beef was. I just knew Pablo as the butt of a lot of Uncle Joey's jokes. Anyhow, I knew my dad could tell the story best, so I asked him to write it out for me several weeks ago. And yay, he finally did it. I've attached his email with the story here. Thanks for sharing. Hey honey, sorry it took me so long to get you this story, but here you are. Back when me and your Uncle Joey were in high school, there was a kid named Pablo in our group of friends. He was like Joey's secret arch rival. They would always be in competition over girls, pinball, even who could eat more pizza in a single sitting. I'll never forget having to sit and watch Joey and Pablo lightheartedly go, slice for slice, on a large meat pizza, and then another. Joey would end up winning that one when Pablo had to exit the establishment before our table became a biohazard. Their rivalry made no sense, but it existed strong between the two of them all throughout high school. Our junior prom rolls around and Joey and I got matching plum purple 3-piece suits. We're looking good with our dates, getting ready to leave the dance when Pablo walks up to me and sheepishly asks if he and his date could get a ride home that night. Pablo's car had a flat, and the spare was already in use from when Joey had shot it with a dart in archery class a few days prior. Needless to say, Joey owed Pablo this favor. The car Joey was driving at the time was a small Ford Pinto. Me and my date were already squished in the back on the ride there. Adding another 2 passengers was going to make it next to impossible to fit in there. Pablo suggests that he could ride in the trunk if his date was able to squeeze herself between the two of us in the back. We probably looked like a circus clown car trying to load in, but we all managed to fit. When we're on the road, Joey starts to speed up and whip the car from left to right. Me and the girls are packed like sardines in the back seat, but behind us, Pablo's getting bounced back and forth off the walls. The trunk of the Pinto isn't really a trunk. It's basically an open floor behind the back seats and a big square rear window. Finally, he starts screaming at Joey to knock it off, and Joey pretends not to know what Pablo's freaking out about. They get to a red light, and Pablo's able to regain his balance and starts leaning past me and the girls, pointing and cussing at Joey. Then, Joey starts turning around and cussing at Pablo, calling him a pussy, telling him to calm down. They're at it like this until Joey's girlfriend Renee just starts shrieking from the front passenger seat. But her screaming has nothing to do with what the boys are fighting about. She's staring at a large black mass that's standing outside Joey's side window. When me and the other girls turned to see it, we all started screaming too. It's enough to finally interrupt the original shouting match that was taking place, and Joey turns around, confused. He looks at Renee, and then he turns to look out of his window. I see both the left and the right passenger windows get smashed in. The figure that was standing outside Joey's window was now reaching in and fighting with Joey. Someone else had apparently been on Renee's side too that we didn't see, because as Joey's getting his ass beat over there, Renee's getting dragged through the broken window by her hair out onto the street. Joey's car door gets forced open and the same thing happens to him next. Some dirty old man sticks his head into the car and sees us crammed in the back. His head leaves the car and his arms replace the open space. In his hand is a literal sawed-off shotgun. The face that briefly dipped into the car did not look like someone trained in the art of gunsmithing. If he pulled that trigger, we were all getting sprayed, and he was probably going to lose his hand in the process. With his other hand, he starts pounding on the roof of the car, shouting, "Get the fuck out, get the fuck out." Ellie pops Renee's vacant seat forward, and we follow her out of the passenger side door. There's another bald man in a flannel with what looked like a leg of wooden chair held against his chest like a sword. My girlfriend's the last one out, and when she hits the pavement, both men jump in the car and crank it into gear. Lying in the street, we watch it peel out and speed into the darkness, with Pablo still in the trunk, pounding on the rear glass. It was absolutely unreal what we had just witnessed, what had just taken place. We were all sitting there dazed until Joey hopped up and started running, looking for a payphone or an open business. Around the block, he found a bar that would let us use their phone. We called the police and our parents. The bartender gave us French fries while we waited for everyone to arrive. I remember that because it was really nice. One of the nicer parts of the night, obviously. It would be basically 2 whole days before we would hear from Pablo. Those men had taken him back to a hotel and planned on using him as a hostage, but Pablo actually escaped on the second night when the men passed out. Once he got out, he ran straight to the front desk and told them everything. And I remember he was still in his prom outfit when his parents picked him up and brought him home. Those 2 men were arrested, but Joey wasn't able to get back the Pinto because it had to be used as evidence in other crimes those men had committed that night. So, you would think some crazy doodle like this would bring Pablo and Joey closer together through some sort of bonding and trauma, right? Not in the slightest. Maybe now you just understand their beef a bit deeper. Uncle Joey did love that car. Okay, kiddo. Sorry again this took so long. You know your father. He's a talker, not a writer. Love ya. I'm a 23-year-old female and I work at Rue 21 in a big outlet mall. On the weekends, we don't close until 10 and I sometimes leave my car there while going out with my friends. They usually drop me off at the end of the night and I go home from there. This past weekend, we stayed out later than usual. I didn't make it back until almost 3:30, and mine was the last car in the parking lot. I'm also a smoker, not a drinker, and I wasn't high when they dropped me off. Best to get that established up front. I was, however, pretty tired. So I scrolled through Instagram while drinking a coffee to wake up a little. I'd only been there for a few minutes when a soft tapping on my passenger side window scared me half to death. The street lamp provided enough light to identify the shape of a young boy from the nose down, but the rest of him was cut off by the top of the door. I watch a lot of true crime, so a kid coming up to my car in the middle of the night had me on edge right away. The fact I didn't hear him coming was also a pretty bad sign. I didn't even have the radio on yet. He must have been deliberately stealthy on his approach. I've seen plenty of horror stories where people use kids as a lure, so all this made me do was check the locks, which were thankfully engaged. Just in case, I called out, "Are you okay? Do you need me to call the police?" He didn't move or respond. Next, I asked him to back up so I could see his face while we talked, but he still didn't move or speak. That was all I needed in order to leave with a clear conscience. I reached down to get my keys from my purse and dropped them on the floorboard. When a second child tapped on my driver's window, I nearly jumped out of my seat. Then, once I saw its face, I screamed bloody murder. A ghostly, pale girl with solid black eyes, who appeared no older than 7, was staring at me as if I were some strange foreign creature. I frantically felt for my keys while looking from one kid to the other. My eyes were filled with tears, so they were just blobs at that point, but I needed to know that they weren't moving. When my fingers finally closed around the ring, I hurried to start the engine, and my headlights turned on to reveal 2 more black-eyed children standing in front of my car. I screamed again as I reversed from the parking lot and ran over a curb in my haste. None of the children moved an inch while I did so I didn't pause to turn my car around until I was on the other side of the mall. I had purposely parked where the cameras wouldn't see how late I returned. My boss can be pretty judgy, but I checked the recordings on Monday anyway. I'd hoped that something would have at least picked up which direction the kids came from, but I couldn't find any sign of them on the footage. I can't explain what happened. I just know I'm not leaving my car at work anymore. At my high school, there was one building that was older than the rest. It was the smallest building on campus, and by the time I went there, it was only used for woodshop and mechanics, 2 classes I never took. Rumor had it that the bathrooms over there were disgusting and horrifying, and that if you were between portables in the newer buildings, you might as well hold it and keep going. Avoid at all costs was sort of the mantra. Easy enough, each building has ample bathrooms that weren't so far away from each other. It was possible. Easy enough until junior year. Junior year, my boyfriend was in mechanics, 6th period. Since I had a free period, I would visit him in that building all the time. The teachers in these areas were, for lack of a better word, more chill. They didn't care about your hall passes, if you should or shouldn't be there. They just cared that you wore safety gear while you were inside the actual shop. One day, I'd already made my way to the shop. I'd already put on the gear and realized I had to pee. I remembered the lore behind this horrific bathroom, but I figured, how bad could it be? I gave a wave to my boyfriend and headed towards the bathroom. It sat between the mechanic shop and the wood shop, tucked in the back of a hallway lined with small lockers for students to hold their belongings. The first thing I wasn't a fan of was how cold it was in there, and that the lights didn't automatically turn on like the other bathrooms. It was old, all right, but all in all, I wasn't seeing what the big deal was. Once I got the lights on, I didn't see anything that stuck out as immediately more disgusting than any other public restroom. I even felt comfortable putting my goggles on the counter. They looked clean. So I go about my business, and as I'm finishing up, I hear the sound of hard plastic bounce and hit the tile floor, followed by a couple of distinct footsteps. Naturally, I freeze because, what the fuck? I lean down as far as I can from my seated position and confirm the sound was my goggles hitting the tile, but I didn't see anything to explain the footsteps. Not gonna lie, I was creeped out, so I sped things up and got myself into a slightly less vulnerable position. As soon as I flushed the toilet, the lights went out. At first, I assumed it was a timer or something, but the more I stood there in the dark, I questioned my own logic. They weren't like the other buildings. This had to be my boyfriend fucking with me. Looking under the stall wouldn't do me any good now in the dark, so I jumped out of the bathroom stall in an attempt to scare my boyfriend or whatever other creep was inside. Nobody screamed, so I lunged for the light switch and turned the lights on, only the switch was still flipped upwards. The lights should have been on. I quickly opened the door to see if anyone else was around, but it was empty, and all the other lights in the building were on. It was quiet. Then, I heard the sound of rushing water. The sound of a toilet flushing. It scared me so much that I literally just ran out of the bathroom and towards the end of the hallway. I turned around and just stood there for a moment. I thought if someone else was there that they would walk out any second, and then I could just move on. After a couple of minutes, I figured I might as well go check it out, grab my goggles, wash my hands, see who the fuck was in there. The first thing I noticed was the light switch was now flipped down. Maybe I did that in my panic. I couldn't remember, so I flipped them on. They did as lights should do and turned on. I grabbed my goggles and noticed that all of the stall doors were open. Before washing my hands, I thought, let's just see if maybe one of these toilets is an automatic flush. I can accept faulty wiring or poor plumbing. Except not. They were all the same toilet. The bathroom was old, and for all I knew, these were the original toilets. Nothing automatic or fancy about them. Washing my hands, I was still trying to run through any and all possibilities in my head. I decided that I would stay in there for a moment, see if the lights did the same thing. I walked into the same stall and sat there for a while. I got my phone out and set a timer for 5 minutes. I knew that was far too long, but figured it was better safe than sorry. Sitting there, even in the light, I decided there was something horrifying about this bathroom. It just had nothing to do with its hygiene. The light stayed on, but as I sat in silence, I started to hear small sounds. I wasn't imagining them. I could hear the sounds of the shop in the distance, people laughing, metal clinking, but I also heard footsteps from within the bathroom, the unmistakable sound of someone walking. And this time, I realized it was 3 steps clearly, and the 4th one faded out. I was so entranced by this realization that I forgot to be scared for a moment, until my alarm went off, causing me to nearly drop my phone in the toilet. I managed to save it that time, but moments after, before I could leave the stall, I felt someone tap my shoulder. It was so clearly the feeling of someone's finger tapping me that I screamed. I proceeded to actually drop my phone in the toilet. Retrieving the phone became my new focus. I grabbed my phone, dried it off the best I could before leaving, but I listened once more. I heard nothing. I was pissed that I hadn't thought to record it before my phone became waterlogged, and I was pissed about the phone too. I stomped out of the bathroom and went to tell my boyfriend what had just happened, but the whole class was gone. I walked through the shop and towards the back outdoor garage. The entire class had been out there for at least 10 minutes. They were working on oil changes today, so my boyfriend, along with a few others, were currently under the shop vehicles working. I decided to cut out and head back to the main building towards the library. I still couldn't believe everything that had happened. I texted my boyfriend that he could find me at the library, and eventually he did. I finally told him everything, and instead of taking me seriously, he laughed and said that they all assumed I was just taking a shit. I was not impressed, so I basically kept my little ghost story to myself after that. And honestly, truly, secretly wished that someday, whatever it was, would scare the shit out of him too. Unfortunately, I never got that satisfaction, and something tells me that even if something did happen, none of those guys would have ever said a word. Either way, that place was haunted or something. I stuck to using any other bathroom for the remainder of my high school career, because sure, it's fun to think about now, but at the time, it was scary as fuck. Always been curious if anyone else ever experienced anything there. It's been up and running for a long time. I've also wondered if I just so happened to talk to the one guy too stupid to realize if something was haunted or not. Who knows, but thanks for reading. I live in an old house that was built in the 1940s. We've always had weird noises, but that's normal for homes like this even when they don't have 5 cats. We're also skeptics, so we've never had a reason to think differently, until my nephew stayed with us last weekend. Dylan is 3, and things got weird within the first couple of hours of his arrival. The living room, kitchen, and dining room are all one big open area. with the TV sitting on an entertainment center that separates the two halves. My husband and I were on the couch sitting directly across from the television, and Dylan was playing with his toys next to my feet. Suddenly, there was a noise in the dining room that sounded like something falling off the counter. It startled him, so I explained that it was just one of the cats. A few minutes later, I noticed that he was still staring at the same spot, and he looked really frightened. I asked if the mean kitties scared him, and he said, "No, that man." We have a tall corner shelf at the far end of the dining room, so, thinking that he might be seeing that, I walked over and turned on the light. Then I pointed to the shelf and asked if that's where the man had been. Dylan shook his head and pointed to a counter on the opposite wall instead. I asked if the guy was still there, and he said no, so we let it go. It was his first time staying with us, so we figured he just wasn't used to the new environment. A few hours later, I was reading Dylan a story for bedtime when he suddenly started crying and pointing at the door. I didn't see anything, but he was too upset to be faking, so I turned on the lights and checked the hallway. When I asked what scared him, he said it was the man again. I did my best to get a description and learned that the guy was old, like Granddad, short and angry. I asked why he seemed angry, and Dylan scrunched his face into a scowl. We took that to mean that he was trying to imitate the man's expression, but I still wasn't sure if this was all one big game or if he really saw someone. I called my sister to see if he had ever done something like this before, and she swore that he's never even had an imaginary friend. She thought that he was playing some kind of game and said not to worry about it, but I think she just wanted me to get off the phone. The next morning, I found Dylan hiding under his blankets. Apparently, the man kept him up most of the night by knocking on the wall and stomping in the hall. Once again, I explained that it was just cats being cats. He's never actually been in a house with pets before, so my husband and I decided that he simply wasn't used to it. The day went on and Dylan's mood improved drastically, especially after putting him down for a nap in our bed. But that evening, we all settled into the living room for another movie, and I caught him staring into the kitchen again. He was shrinking back against the couch like he was trying to pass through it. Hoping to ease his mind before bedtime, I turned on all the lights and said, "See? There's nothing." But that's where I stopped, because one of the drawers suddenly slid open by itself. There was no cat anywhere near us, and our floors are not so unlevel that drawers randomly slide open. We've lived here for 6 years, and that has never happened. Thankfully, my husband saw it too, or I would have thought I lost my mind. I immediately closed the drawer back, but it slid open again as soon as I walked away. Dylan began crying and wanted to go home. His parents wouldn't return until late the following night, so we let him stay in our bed, and he slept fine. We didn't, but he was fine. Not gonna lie, we were all pretty on edge the next day. My husband and I were both flinching at every noise, even the ones that clearly were caused by the cats. As we got within the final hour of Dylan's stay, we were checking my sister's location every few minutes. Just when I really began to think that something else would happen, our bedroom door creaked open several inches, just wide enough for someone to stick their head in. Sure enough, Dylan ran to me crying. The old man was watching us from the bedroom, and he didn't like it. Believe me, none of us liked it. My husband shut the door, and thankfully, it stayed shut. My sister arrived 20 minutes later, and Dylan was ready to go. I'd never seen him move that fast. When I told her everything over the phone that night, she said that he's never afraid when he's stayed with her in-laws or our parents, and he hasn't seen anything remotely similar to this on TV. She thinks we have a real ghost, but I don't know what to believe. I can't explain how Dylan saw a man near a drawer that opened by itself. That's the one that really gets me. Various arguments can be made for the rest, but the drawer is something else. It's been a few days since everything happened, and my nephew hasn't seen the man again, so I'll take that as a win unto itself. My husband and I haven't seen anything overtly paranormal either. But we're still jumping at every sound, and there are long periods when we feel as if we're being watched. I know we're probably extra paranoid too, so that's why we wanted to share our story to see what others think. I should also mention, 4 of our cats have always behaved in such ways that we would never think anything else was here. But since trying to research this topic, I've read that some believe animals can see things we can't. That being said, most of our cats seem fairly oblivious, except for Twitch, and believe me, he earned his name. We found him on the side of the road when he was only a couple of months old, no sign of a mother or siblings, and we brought him home. Since he's gotten here, he'll randomly cower from thin air or attack nothing. You know how cats will belly crawl up to something they aren't sure about and kind of smack it and run away in one motion? He does that a lot, but to nothing. At one point, we were worried enough to take him to our vet, and we said that he was having hallucinations. She agreed it didn't sound normal, but lots of expensive tests later, he got a clean bill of health, and we accepted that he was just a quirky cat. Now, I'm wondering about that again, too. I don't know. I guess that's everything, though. So thanks for listening, and all advice is greatly appreciated. When I was a kid, we lived next to a really big creek, and my dad would regularly take me to swim or look for fossils. We were in a rural area, so there weren't any other houses or people around. I'm not sure it has an actual name, but we always called it Riley's Creek, even though we have no clue who Riley is. My favorite area was a big swimming hole beneath an old bridge. For the most part, you could walk through the water anywhere you wanted and never go deeper than your ankles. But this was one of those sweet spots. I'm a lover of all animals, so I always paid attention to noises around me. Raccoons and deer were a common sight, but I was mostly looking for beavers. I enjoyed helping them build their dams, but looking back, I'm now realizing I probably did more harm than good. If nothing else, I'm sure they didn't appreciate my scent in their territory. Oh well, this isn't about beavers. This is about something much larger that I still can't identify. While I played in the swimming hole, Dad looked for fossils, but then he realized his beeper was still in the truck. It was so much faster for him to simply run back and get it rather than dragging me along. Some of the terrain was pretty rugged for an 8-year-old, and he had to carry me for those sections. Ultimately, he decided that I could be alone for a few minutes. It was the 90s after all, so he went without me. From where I sat in my big swimming hole, he had to walk up a steep hill to my left. On my right was the forest, and there was no place to get out on that side. Just a steep embankment and the overgrown tree line. It's important to understand we're discussing 2 completely opposite directions. It was impossible for my dad to be in the woods, especially so fast. He was only out of my sight for a minute, probably less, when his voice called my name from the forest next to me. I was looking up the steep embankment and into the branches of the overhanging trees, rather than actually seeing into the woods. So I was completely blind from my spot. At first, I assumed I heard wrong, that Dad had simply returned to take me with him after all, but I didn't see him while crawling out of my swimming hole. I stood with my back to the dense forest and watched the place that Dad should have been standing, but there was still no sign of him. Then I heard, "Hey, Emma." It was definitely behind me, and definitely his voice. But the way he said it, it was weird. The inflection made it sound like a question, as if he wasn't sure it was me. But who else would it have been? When it happened, I turned around with a startled cry and scanned the area with desperate urgency. But the only thing I saw were jumbles of green and brown. I moved a few feet further down, but came to a dead stop when a pair of footsteps also began walking through the woods in the same direction. They stopped when I stopped, and as I turned back to the forest, I saw something too big to be human move behind a tree. It was on 2 legs, and there are no bears out in our area. And even if there were, that wouldn't have explained how it spoke. It called my name once more, only that time it sounded angry. I didn't want to stay there anymore. I wasn't sure how long Dad had been gone, but he should have at least been on his way back now. I thought if I raced to the truck, I would run into him sooner rather than later, but then I worried whatever was in the woods might chase me, and I wasn't sure how fast I could get up that hill. It was steep and overgrown with sticker bushes. I'd always needed help getting up and down. In the end, I settled for slowly backing away as quietly as possible. If it turned out that I had to run anyway, I wanted as much of a head start as I could possibly get. All the while, my eyes never moved from the tree where I saw the figure disappear. I'd gone 3 or 4 yards when it suddenly stepped out from its hiding spot, and I had a clear view. It looked like a deer standing on its hind legs, but with arms and hands. It had antlers, but its head was mostly human-shaped aside from its nose and mouth. I mean, I was a terrified child, so maybe the face can be explained by a mask. But there was something really wrong with its body. I only saw it for a few seconds before breaking into a full run, and I didn't start screaming until it dropped into the water with a loud splash. I had just made it to the bottom of the hill and was starting my way up when my dad appeared at the top. Out of breath, with a wild look in his eyes, he saw that I was clearly in a state of total panic, but couldn't figure out why. When he failed to scream and run away, I looked back to see that the creature was gone, or hiding, and I didn't want to be there when it came out again. Dad didn't want to leave without knowing what had happened, and he's an extremely logical man. I wasn't playing the game where he made me look under the bed to prove that nothing was there. So I said that a weird man tried to get me to follow him into the woods. We left really fast after that, and we didn't go back again, which was fine with me. I've never actually told him the truth just because I know that he wouldn't believe me. He would say that I just let my overactive imagination ruin one of my favorite places. But I know what I saw. That thing had antlers and stood on 2 legs. I was done with that creek, period. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world over here. So, thanks so much for listening. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open long enough for those deep sleep videos and, of course, double features. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, whom we appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, The Dark Cosmos, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alisha S, Erin G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendon G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Lissane, Arlene F, and Adrienne. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.